Ladies and gentlemen, dear students, welcome to Eco Astronomy International Network Astro Week. Actually, we are beyond honored to have with us today one of the most incredibly creative and devoted experts in his domain, Dr. Jason Kennedy. He is a senior lecturer and the curriculum leader for the animation, visual effects, and game design major at Auckland University of Technology. He is both a professional animator and a talented actor who uses his combined expertise to investigate the nature of performance within the context of animation and motion capture. Dear all, we also want to take this special moment to express how grateful we are to Dr. Kennedy for all his contributions to empower knowledge sharing in Sri Lanka through our institution. Now, for this special Astro Week, Dr. Kennedy will take us on a super exciting journey through his lecture to discover for the first time the 3D reconstruction of the Quaternary fossils in Sri Lanka. Doctor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. And I am very privileged and honored, of course, to be here as part of the Eco Astronomy team. And I always find it quite rewarding here to share what I'm doing with everyone else. So as you can probably tell, I am not in Sri Lanka. I am in Auckland, New Zealand, and I collaborate remotely as a result. Why would somebody who is an animator or a motion capture artist have anything to do with the study of paleontology or paleoart? In multidisciplinary astronomy, the way that eco astronomy is set up. Well, my background before I was an animator was I was basically becoming a paleontologist as well. And I found that there were aspects of being a professional paleontologist that I just wasn't as in love with as I wanted to be, but I was always very creative. And I very much enjoyed designing dinosaurs, drawing them, creating art from them. And I went off and studied and became a lecturer in animation, and for many, many years did not really have much to do with paleontology until a few years ago when I became involved with eco astronomy. And this was a really great opportunity to expand my research into an area that I've always really enjoyed, which is scientific visualization. In this case, specifically creating visuals for paleontological research, and here specifically to assist with the visualization of these creatures that existed back in basically the Ice Age, for lack of a really definitive term. And these are species or subspecies that seem to be endemic to Sri Lanka. So this is sort of our first way of really seeing these animals in a robust way. And I'm going to go into that in more detail here, but these will be the first 3D reconstructions for these creatures. So this is paleontology and paleoart in Sri Lanka. Now, there we go. That's me. It's a better picture of me than what's probably on your screen at the moment. And as Majda said, I am a professional animator and a professional actor, and I use both of those areas in my normal research. So I've been with Auckland University of Technology, AUT, for almost 17 years now. It's been quite a while. And so this has been, it's been quite a journey to get to where I am. So let's just dive into it. What is the importance of Lankan paleontology? Sri Lanka, to be honest, is not the place we normally think of when we think of paleontology. But that doesn't mean that there isn't good paleo research happening there. In fact, there is. So because Sri Lanka isn't as on the map, per se, as you would find in other parts of the world like China, the United States, Canada, Patagonia and South America, those places, right? People really aren't that aware of what exists there. And even though there's a lot of good Indian paleontology happening, that doesn't really find its way down into Sri Lanka in terms of what the general knowledge is around the world. So this is an opportunity to try to help bring the knowledge and science that's occurring in Sri Lanka to a broader context around the world. And I've been trying to do that with the research that I've been doing with Dr. Simanaratna. And in doing so, I've brought this research to Australia, I've brought it to Chile, I've brought it to Brazil, and of course I've brought it back to Sri Lanka as well. So what is really the importance of studying paleontology in the first place? Well, from the perspective of where you live, it's always important to understand what has happened in the past, because what's happened in the past is a key to what's going to happen now and in the future as well. Uncovering Sri Lanka's rich biological heritage and biodiversity is a real key aspect of this project. Sri Lanka is home to so many species, and many of which that only live on the island, including lots of extinct species that only lived on the island as well. Paleontology reveals how conditions and events in the past impacted extinct species, right? How they lived, how they thrived, how they died. And this kind of knowledge is important to us today because it provides guidance for how to care for and protect the currently living species. That is, like I said before, the past informs our present and our future. Now, the fossils that we're looking at in this research come from primarily Ratnapura and areas around the Subaragamua Basin. So the regions like Ratnapura exist in ecological conditions very similar to what the conditions are today. So the creatures that we're studying were basically living in the same kind of climate and environment as what we see today in the same places, which makes it really so much easier to understand exactly, the conditions that they lived with. We don't have to do as much scientific guesswork, essentially. So this makes them a vital source of information for modern planning and government initiatives as well, such as studying the effects of climate change and deforestation, conservation efforts, sustainable tourism. And so with all those things, we're able to understand, we're able to really draw upon the knowledge of what's happened in the past to really inform us, again, what's going on now. So this is kind of my desire to get people engaged with this knowledge, to take pride in it, and to also implement it into the public discourse and into the political space as well. Encouraging ministers of parliament to embrace this type of research, to find value in it, to be able to continue this type of research, to find impact from it. Sri Lanka has a rich archaeological history, and I'm sure that most of you know that way better than I do, right? I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on the archaeology of Sri Lanka, but its paleontological heritage is equally important. And like the archaeology from Sri Lanka, the paleontology from Sri Lanka should also be a great source of historical and cultural pride, in my opinion, but I think also in the opinion of the people who are putting on this event today as well, right? And hopefully that's how you feel too. Studying Sri Lanka's paleoecologies is key to understanding the nation's important role in the ecological relationship between the Indian Ocean and the South Asian subcontinent. So we're looking at collaborations with and contributions to the overall global scientific community in this respect, and importantly, trying to increase the profile of Lankan research, trying to really demonstrate how important and valuable and good this research is on the broader scientific global stage. So let's go into what I've been working on and show you more of, the how we get to the imagery that we're developing. So some paleoart collaboration here. First off, what do we mean by paleoart? There is no specific, completely 100% agreed upon definition for what is paleoart, but you could say the same thing about just the word art in general. There's always going to be variations in the way that we understand it. But here is a definition that the researchers Anson et al. Have put forward that I think is quite good. Paleoart is any original artistic manifestation that attempts to reconstruct or depict prehistoric life according to the current knowledge and scientific evidence at the moment of creating the artwork. So there's really two conditions here. The first is that it needs to basically be considered artistic at some level. It can't just be very crude and lacking in certain artistic design practices. It doesn't mean that it has to be 100% realistic. There can be some room for interpretation, but it's also not just completely interpretive or expressionistic or something like that. And also, the other really important part of this is that the people who are creating this art have to do their research and make sure that the research is current at the time that they're creating it, so that all of the anatomical details, environmental factors, social conditions that we think we understand about extinct creatures, all those different things are in line with where the current research is. Now, that doesn't mean that that won't change. That's always been the case, that things constantly change as we learn more. And by things changing doesn't mean that something that was once considered a work of paleoart suddenly no longer is. So long as the work that was created according to the current knowledge, current scientific consensus at the time of its creation. So this project is a collaborative scientific visualization project between Sri Lanka and New Zealand. And the initial intention for this, where does it all come from? Well, we want to create a documentary film that integrates 10 extinct Sri Lankan species into live action background. Something, kind of like Life on Our Planet, if you've watched that. But to be honest, that's a really huge goal. And I think I've been upfront about this from the beginning, that it's not one of those things that necessarily is going to happen, or if it is, maybe it will happen in a smaller way than originally intended. And that's fine. That's all good. But those kinds of productions are huge. They have massive teams, lots of money, and they have production power behind them. So where are we at right now? Well, let's take a look at what we can create. What do we know? What can we use at this stage that can help to advance the science and the visualization of the science at this time? So this presentation introduces 4 out of those 10 completed species. What's important is that this research comprises the first published paleoart of extinct Sri Lankan species using photorealistic 3D animation. Very specific there. It's important to be specific if you're a scientist. Using 3D, why is 3D animation important? Well, when we look at the earlier visualizations of these creatures, most of them were done in a 2D hand-drawn style, kind of loose. I say loose in the way of describing the artistic style. They're an approximation, but they're not necessarily as refined as what we can get when we try to create something using 3D sculpting, 3D modeling to make it as robust and fully understood as possible, visually speaking, that is. Several of these species have not had their visualizations updated since the 1950s. And so we're looking at some species 60 or 70 years not having any new visualizations of them. the research not really advancing. The research may be advancing scientifically, but we're not seeing the visual aspect of it advancing alongside it. There is limited paleoart that supports research from Sri Lanka. The most notable examples are Paulus Dharaniagala, who you all may be familiar with, presumably, Kelam Manamendra Arachchi, and by the way, I am sure I am not pronouncing everything correctly, but I'm going to do my best. Sarana Dhananjaya Sanapati and Lalith Vijayasinghe. So I'll show some examples from these artists as well. This here is an example of what I have on my screen of the species Paleoloxodon pneumaticus synhelaeus by Dharaniagala from 1956. Now, and this remains basically the most recent visualization of this specific subspecies, Paleoloxodon pneumaticus synhelaeus, that we have until this research came along. Right? That was 1956. And so now it's, what, 2025? That is, what, 69 years? Right? Did I do my math right? Sure. Yeah. So, it's practically 70 years. And it's a nice drawing, but it's also, like I said, loose. It's not heavy on the details. And this is the majority of the image. It's a little cut off here on the screen, but it's the majority of the image. Dharaniagala didn't go in and actually sketch the entire creature. If we go back and look at the original images, the publications where this comes from, we only get a partial reconstruction. Here is a couple examples. These are more recent, within the past 20 years or so. This is Manamendra Arachchi's work. This is Hexaprotodon synhelaeus, an extinct hippopotamus, and Rhinoceros cagavena, an extinct rhinoceros species from 2004 and 2005. These ones are done. These are paintings. They're good, but again, detail-wise, they're more detailed, but they're also still somewhat limited. Here we have some work from Sanapati, and again, this is not me trying to be critical. I'm not trying to be criticizing any work, but what I would say is that the work here is illustrative, right? They're more like illustrations. They're a good starting point, but I think we can do better still. I think we can build on this. We can use these as starting points, but we can build on them, and that's really where we want to go. I think here are two examples, some sculptures, which are much more recent, from 2012 to 2014, in the, sorry, I'm going to pull a blank here real quick. The Paleobiodiversity Park in Ratnapura, I believe. Please correct me if I'm mistaken there. I don't have my notes here. And these two sculptures, I think, are quite useful because Vijayasinghe had to actually physically create them in 3D and really consider them from all angles. And that's a really great step toward doing some kind of 3D reconstruction. 3D modeling is essentially like 3D sculpture in real life, except for it's all digital. So I found these quite useful as a starting point. Now, there are some very distinct challenges in creating photorealistic digital versions of extinct species. There's limited fossil evidence, for one thing, especially for these species that we're dealing with. The species from Sri Lanka are, sadly, very kind of poorly represented in terms of the fossil record. And that's not the fault of any of the paleontologists saying that, they're not doing their job right or something like that. It's just a matter that when you find the fossils, there's only some limited aspects that we can discover. There's also been, over time, some of the fossils, because of when they were discovered or where they were discovered or where they were put, have become lost. And that's obviously problematic as well. So we have to rely on historical documentation. Some of the work by Durrani Agala, for instance, documents it, but we don't have the fossils to go back and look at today in certain cases. So also, as a paleo artist, I'm going to want to go back and look at existing paleo art from this same region, basically, for the animals from the same region. But because the existing paleo art is minimal and quite dated and lacking in many important details, including full reconstructions of the creatures in certain cases, then I don't have that to go back to look at as much as I would for paleontology in other parts of the world. And also, just in terms of the process of working with 3D animation, planning, modeling, texturing, rigging 10 distinct species is a significant undertaking, even when working with a professional team. So there's a lot of time involved with it, a lot of very specialized knowledge involved with it. And those sorts of things are barriers to getting the work done and out and published and all of that. So I'm just acknowledging that up front so everybody is aware of it. This project, when it began a couple of years ago, one of the ways that I tried to work with it was to bring in some of my students. Now, they're not paleontologists, they're animators and visual effects artists and game designers, but I functioned basically as what we call a visual effects supervisor. And I'm running the project essentially, and I'm figuring out what jobs need to be done in terms of modeling the creatures or texturing them or any of the different roles. And so I brought in some students who were interested in this project to do some internships with it. And the goal with this was to help them develop some additional industry level skills as part of their education, and also to give me additional people to work on the project to try to get it done faster. And when we were doing this, we utilized an industry standard production workflow, keeping everybody together, working on, this is very basic. It's like a Trello board, but it's a way of keeping the project, all the different phases of the project understood by different people working on it. And so there's a lot of organization that goes into a project like this. Now, as we were working toward a high-end product, we needed to work with more advanced software. So this is not just something that's, free software out there. It's taking advantage of the fact that our university has access to this software. Autodesk Maya is our principal 3D software. It's the industry standard software for 3D animation and 3D production in general. ZBrush is a sculpting software that we used extensively to get the high resolution results on the animals. Substance Painter we use for texturing to create the different colors and shading and materiality on the creatures. And then something like what we call Arnold, it's a rendering software. It's what turns what we see here in the viewport of Maya into a finished image that looks really nice. And so our students were trained in how to use all these software. Now, for instance, here is a reference photo of an Asian elephant. What we wanted to do with this was to simply create a substitution where we could go through and take an existing photograph of a landscape that actually exists in the regions that these creatures would have been from originally, and then swap out an animal that's there for the extinct version or the extinct relative, right? So here we have an Asian elephant, the reference photo, and here is now the swap to the final version of the Paleoloxodon Pneumaticus synhelaeus, which, as you can see, is substantially larger, right? So if you go back and forth between that, the correct scale for this is at the shoulder. This animal was 4 meters tall, roundabout, to the best of our knowledge, and that's it towers above the Asian elephant, and the Asian elephant is already quite large. So just in seeing that, it already gives us a sense of appreciation, I think, and understanding of just how monumental these creatures really were. Paleoloxodon pneumaticus is the largest, or one of the largest terrestrial animals to have ever terrestrial mammals, I should say, to ever live. And so it's a very, very large creature. Here's another example. This is here's some tourists, most likely. I'm going to assume they're tourists. And a little reference photo there on the back of an Asian elephant. And here we have now the substitution of our Paleoloxodon pneumaticus synhelaeus. So what's nice about this too is that I can, because it's a 3D model, I can show this from any angle. I can, recreate basically any image, any photograph, any sort of, the filmic aspect of the image. I can always modify to make it look like a substitute's in there. And again, you really get that sense of just the vast hugeness of this creature. And also, if we really want to, we can bring the family back and have them have them go for a ride as well. But I probably wouldn't recommend that. I presume that if they fell off the back there, they'd really injure themselves. He's probably not very friendly, I'm going to imagine. Here's a Rhinoceros cagavena. This is another one of our 4 creatures that is part of this research. And here we have a sort of a marshy, floodplainy kind of environment. What's challenging in this kind of imagery is to match the lighting. And so, the lighting doesn't happen automatically. It's something that you really have to craft as the artist. And to get that, you have to figure out what direction is the lighting coming from, what is the intensity of it. There's a whole bunch of digital lights in this one shot just to kind of create the illumination that we see here. It's really one of those things that is a undervalued, underappreciated aspect of 3D production, because it's really critical to the integration of the image. Getting the right shadows, getting the right coloration of the lights, getting the right intensity of the lights, and so all those things matter. And so this one here, there was originally a different rhinoceros here in this shot, which I don't have that one. But I was following the lighting that I was seeing there and trying to recreate that on our digital version here. A little bit closer here so we can just see some of those details. And so, as you can see with this, hopefully, it's not that just details means better, because details I could go in here and I could put all kinds of details on it, but if they're not the right details, it doesn't matter. Right, so what we want to do is to try to follow what we know from living creatures that are close relatives to this species, and any other information that we can figure out from the fossil record, to then go back and then apply that to the way we sculpt this, the way that we add all these fine level details, and then hopefully, as scientists look at this, they can appraise it. And they can say whether or not they think it's accurate for one reason or another. And if they disagree, that's fine, because our goal here is to continue to update, continue to improve our Paleoart as we go along. So, it's probably very likely at some point down the line, somebody's going to look at this and say, well, that was the best they could do in 2024, right? But now we know so much more, and they would critique it and say, well, we need to update it for all these reasons. But that's fine. That's part of the process, and that's part of just being a scientist or a paleo artist. Even with this, this is a pretty small detail that doesn't really stick out here too much because of the scale of the image. But there's just like a little bit of a break here in the horn as well, on the nostril horn. Just little extra details there to try to create some irregularities, to make it look like this creature has lived its life, that it's not perfect. You get things here on the ears, like the light is coming through. It's actually, you can see how it's sort of a little bit lighter and a little bit pinker right there in the ears. That's what we call subsurface scattering. Just like if you hold a flashlight or a torch to your hand and you look through the back of your hand, you get that red glow that comes through, or if you did it to your ear, right? Same thing here. It's some light's passing through the thin skin there, and it's resulting in there being a little bit of subsurface absorption, and it creates a difference in color. We don't want that to be all shadow, because otherwise it's not going to look like it's skin. It's going to look like it's concrete or something. So all those factors are really important as well in terms of materials. Here's another rhinoceros species. This is Rhinoceros synhelaeus. This one is, as you can tell, between these two, this one is a bit taller, or I should say it's a bit more graceful in a way. You can see the legs are longer, are thinner. It has a very different build to it than Kagavena did. And, this is just a little bit of integration here with the birds. Also, what we're trying to do is to create some sense of recognizable landscape in each of these images. So here we have, it's, you might recognize this is just sort of a silhouette of Adam's Peak in the background there. This image here, in fact, if we went through and looked at the whole image, because this is zoomed in a little bit, we would see the same thing up here, another image of Adam's Peak. Just something that kind of recognizably sits this imagery within Sri Lanka for people who are in the know, but also for people who aren't necessarily in the know. So here again, and we have some nice textural details in here, some mottling on the skin, for instance, which is very typical of rhinoceros skin patterns. Same thing here on the face. So it's not all just one solid color. You can see some hair here on the ears, as well as on the tail, things like that. So these are all just different features that get factored in. And then this is the final one for today. This is Hexaprotodon synhelaeus, and this hippopotamus gets its name based on the 6 teeth. Basically, we have the 6 incisors here, which is similar to like a pygmy hippopotamus, but very different to other hippopotamus species. And this was based again on an existing photograph where I swapped out the existing hippo and substituted in this version, trying to match the lighting, etc. But what I did was in the original photo, there was this other hippo on the ground, and you can't really see much of it. So I decided to leave it in there because I felt it kind of added to the integration. And that way, anybody looking at this would say, oh, it's just another one of these. They wouldn't know that it's actually a different hippo. And that's kind of nice. It's like trying to choose the imagery that's going to work well, the background imagery that's going to work well for the Paleoart as well. And we get a little bit closer to it. This is a bit of a challenging one because there's so much going on inside the mouth here, and I'm not 100% like totally satisfied with it. I think it's a good start, but there is some stuff going on inside the mouth that I'd like to tweak. It's a bit too smooth. I'd like to get a better sense of separation between like the tongue and the rest of the inner parts of the mouth and things like that. So there's always ways to improve on things, but as a starting point, it's a decent place to begin with, right? And it's certainly an update on what we would have otherwise. Now, I'm just going to wrap up here. Some notable outcomes from this research so far. I have, in the last year, presented this research in 3 different places. I was getting ahead of myself. 3 different places. The first place was in Sydney, Australia, at the Animation Studies Society for Animation Studies Conference, which is a very important industry and academic conference that within the animation studies world. that occurs every year at different places in the world. It happens all over the world. Just this past year, it happened to be in Australia, which was convenient for me because I'm in New Zealand, and it's only about a 3-hour plane ride away from me. For everybody else in the world, though, it was very inconvenient, which is basically what it's like living down in Australia or New Zealand. It's good when things happen in either of those places if you live in either of those places, but for everybody else, it's a huge inconvenience because they're so far away. But you should visit, right? If you ever have the opportunity, I highly recommend it. I also presented at a new symposium that was held at my university back in July called Animation Under the Lens, Embracing Diverse Perspectives, which was looking at different ways in which animation is used, essentially. And so this was good research to bring into that as well, because it's outside of the normal thing that people think about when they think about animation. And then most recently, I mentioned earlier that I was in Chile and Brazil recently. I presented this research at the LINC 2024 International Conference of Practice and Research in Design and Global South. A bit of a, I didn't come up with that title. I think I would have probably phrased it a little bit differently if I had, to be honest, but never mind. It basically, this is the 6th year in which the LINC conference has gone on, and the idea of it is to is for practice-led research, which is very much outside of the world of science, by the way. It's almost antithetical to science in some ways, but in this case, I'm bringing it into science. I'm matching the two things together. But the idea is that if you look at the globe, the vast majority of the population of the world is in the northern hemisphere. And therefore, the majority of the research that occurs is also in the northern hemisphere. So can we put together a conference that focuses on research from the southern hemisphere? This is the notion of the global south, and specifically research around the notion of practice-led research. And so this was in Valparaiso, Chile, which is where I was back in November, and then I was in São Paulo, Brazil, back in December. So, and the presentation I gave there was this. This is the first page from it: muscular headband or sexual display. It's looking at it's basically looking at some decisions that I was making in terms of the cranium of Paleoloxodon pneumaticus synhelaeus in this research, which I didn't go into in this conversation, but basically to give you a very, very brief understanding of it, these Paleoloxodon species have these craniums that have a bit of an overhang here, and for a long time people didn't really quite know what it was for. In fact, if you go back and look at I'm going to skip way back here so I can go forward again. But if we went back and looked at some of Durrani Agala's illustrations here, you can see he's got these sort of folds happening. So it wasn't really clear whether or not this was meant to be a sexual display. A lot of people thought perhaps this was, the bigger the folding was, maybe the more attractive you were to other members of your own species. And that was kind of an idea that was held for a long time. But more recent research, especially by Larramendi et alia, looks at the fact that this area here, even though this is Paleoloxodon antiquus, it's a species that's similar but not the same as Paleoloxodon pneumaticus. All the Paleoloxodons have this little bit of overhang, and so Larramendi said, well, this looks like this is actually a site for muscle attachment, and which would make sense because as these creatures get bigger and bigger, and Paleoloxodon pneumaticus was the biggest of them all, as they got bigger, so too did that overhang. And as they get bigger, the head's getting bigger, the tusks are getting bigger, the trunk is getting bigger, so everything that's in the front of the creature is heavier. And therefore you would need to have more muscles back here connecting to the spine to hold it up. And this looked like a really good place for muscle attachment, specifically the splenius muscle and perhaps the extrasplenius muscle as well. And so that was something that we brought into this research in terms of the way that we modeled the creature. And it's the first time that Paleoloxodon pneumaticus sinhaleus has been modeled in this way. And then there are some additional things on the horizon for where this research will go. I have a paper that I've started writing, which I plan to send to Paleontologia Electronica, which is a great online open access research journal. If you aren't familiar with that one, definitely check it out. And they also do a lot of Paleoart related research there as well, which is why I'm choosing them. And then also looking at doing a book chapter in an updated version of Fossils of Sri Lanka, chapter Sabaragamua Basin. So that pretty much wraps me up. Thank you very much for listening. And are we doing any questions and answers or
Absolutely, but
okay.
first, I can hear my voice returning to me.
Oh, I'll mute myself. Hold on.
I scared myself. Actually, first thing first, this is just wonderful, amazing. Actually, you have spent a lot of time, lot of efforts to contribute to this amazing, wonderful work. And your lecture today is just giving that vibe of like empowerness and like, let's do something for Sri Lanka again. Let's make the paleontology great again in Sri Lanka. Thank you so much for every single effort and for the time, and also all your team that have like contributed to such a very valuable work to keep up the paleontology of Sri Lanka, to keep up the information sharing of paleontology of Sri Lanka, because as you have mentioned, we didn't have that much knowledge about Sri Lanka's paleontology. And I guess our CEO can also our CEO, you can also add something if you want to mention what is going on with the paleontology in Sri Lanka, or how we can contribute